Hello students. So today we will start with a new chapter, that is chapter 4. The name of the chapter is Psychological Disorders. In this presentation I will be covering introduction, concept of abnormality with the 4 Ds, approaches to study abnormal behavior, which includes social norm and maladaptive behavior. And at last, I will cover stigma related to abnormal behavior. Introduction. Now, I'm pretty sure that you must have come across people who are unhappy, troubled, and dissatisfied. Yes? So, their minds and hearts are filled with sorrow, unrest, and tension, and often they feel that they are unable to move ahead in their lives. They feel life is a painful uphill struggle and sometimes not even worth living. So, here, at times, some of you may have felt nervous before an important examination, tense and concerned about your future career, or anxious when someone close to you was unwell. Yes? However, some people have an extreme reaction to the problems and stresses of life. Now, how can I be substantial without casting a shadow? I must have a dark side too. If I am to be whole, and by becoming conscious of my shadow, I remember once more that I am a human being like any other. So, this was said by a famous analytical psychologist whose name was Carl Jung, and he meant that everyone has some kind of darkness in them. Everyone feels a little bit of tensed at times, a little bit of conscious, and anxious as well. Now, in this chapter, we will try to understand what goes wrong when people develop psychological problems, what are the causes and factors which lead to abnormal behavior, and what are the various signs and symptoms associated with different types of psychological disorders. Now, let us try to understand the concepts of abnormality and psychological disorders. Although many definitions of abnormality have been used over the years, none has won universal acceptance. Do you know what is abnormality? Your answer might simply be like someone who is not normal. Yes? Still, most definitions have certain common features. Now, in psychology, we basically have 4 Ds in order to represent abnormality. And these 4 Ds are deviance, distress, dysfunction, and danger. I'm sure that none of you have heard of deviance, distress, dysfunction, but danger, you all know what danger is. Now, when we are talking about abnormality and psychological disorders, we are also talking about the person. And here, with 4 Ds, these 4 Ds can be seen in a person who is slowly slipping into abnormality. Okay? Now, about deviance, what do you mean by deviance? Deviant behavior are the behaviors which are very different, extreme, unusual, and even bizarre. Next is distressing. Distressing in the sense that the person himself or herself creates situations which are not pleasant, and he or she upsets himself or herself as well as the others who are around him or her. Okay. Third, dysfunctional. Dysfunctional basically means that when a person is moving towards being abnormality or is developing some kind of psychological disorders, slowly all his day-to-day activities are being interfered with his disorders, with his or her psychological disorders, or with his or her abnormality. So interfering with person's ability to carry out day-to-day activities in a constructive way is regarded as dysfunctional. The person might not be able to even take his own but maybe he or she is not able to even eat properly by himself or herself. He or she always needs an assistance. Okay, someone have to be there to take care of them. They are totally dependent on another person. That is dysfunctional. Then the fourth one, danger. So a person who develops certain kind of psychological disorders, that person is dangerous to himself or herself as well as to others. That means he or she starts hurting or harming. He or she starts behaving in a way where maybe he or she might also attack the other people. That is why it is regarded to be a dangerous behavior. So this definition is a useful starting point from which we can explore psychological abnormality. Since the word abnormal literally means away from the normal, it implies deviation from some clearly defined norms and standards. Alright? And in psychology, note it down. In psychology, we have no ideal model or even normal model of human behavior to use as a base for comparison. Since we do not have any perfect role model, any ideal model or normal model, because no person is normal, he or she have some kind of abnormality. Okay, since we have also have heard of the fact that no person is perfect. So since if no one is perfect, then how can we have a base to compare the human behavior? So it is always a hard thing to, define about the normal behavior. But it is just a fact that there are certain kind of norms that we have to follow in a society. Okay? Now, as we know that there is no perfect role model or an ideal model or a normal model, so we cannot use any human behavior as the base for comparison. We cannot compare it. So, depending on this definitions and also the fact that there does not exist any kind of ideal model or normal model, so there emerges certain approaches that distinguishes between normal and abnormal behavior. And from these approaches, there emerge two basic and conflicting views. Let's see what are these two approaches. The first approach views abnormal behavior as a deviation from social norms. And I hope you all know about norms, right? Norms are certain kind of set rules and regulations which are not written, which are made by person. Okay, and each society has certain norms which they have developed by themselves. Okay, they have certain rules and regulations. Conduct of behavior, they have certain conduct of behavior. So as each society has certain norms that are stated or unstated rules of conduct, behaviors, thoughts and emotions that break these societal norms are basically called abnormal according to this first approach. Okay, now a society's norms grow from its particular culture. We know that, isn't it? So whether it is its history, values, institutions, habits, skills, technology or arts, it is the culture which have a basis of the societal norms. So therefore what happens is that if a society whose culture values competition and assertiveness, they may accept aggressive behavior as normal. Okay, whereas one that emphasizes cooperation and family values, such as in India. Now here, that behavior, that aggressive behavior is considered as unacceptable, or even we will call it as abnormal behavior. If someone is very aggressive and shows aggression in every behave, behavior they do, in every act if in every act they show aggression, we will regard it as abnormal behavior. Understanding the point? So if in my culture I'm doing something and it is accepted by the society, I will keep continuing doing it. But if the same thing, same behavior, I go in another culture, another society and act it out, they will regard me to be abnormal because that behavior is not suitable or accepted in the other culture. Okay, so basically a society's values may also change over time, causing its views of what is psychologically abnormal to change as well. Because we know that norms are not written rules and regulations. So therefore there is chance that it might get changed later on. Hmm? So societies are very dynamic in nature. Therefore, the norms are also dynamic in its nature. Therefore, a society's values, we might assume that it may change over time. And this causes its view that psychological psychologically abnormality will also change as well. So therefore it is based on the assumption that socially accepted behavior is not abnormal and that normality is nothing more than conformity to social norms. So according to the first approach, it is based on the assumption that whatever the society accepts, the behavior which we are doing, if it is accepted by the society, then it is not regarded as abnormal. And also if all the other people are doing the same thing and we are also doing the same thing based on the conformity, so according to that conformity as well, our behavior is not considered as abnormal. Now let us see what the second approach views abnormal behavior as. So the second approach views abnormal behaviors as maladaptive. In the first, we saw it to be deviation from social norms. Yes, here we are seeing it to be maladaptive according to the second approach. Now, many psychologists believe that best criterion for determining the normal behavior is not whether your society accepts it or not, but whether it fosters the well-being of the individual and of the group where he or she belongs to it or not. That means whether the person is growing properly or not, developing properly or not. That is adaptive, whether the person is able to adapt himself or herself properly in the environment or not. And maladaptive is something where the person is not being able to adapt himself or herself properly in his or her existing environment. Okay, environment or the situation. Now here, well-being is not simply maintenance and survival, but also includes growth and fulfillment. Okay, growth and fulfillment should be there. That is the actualization of potential. Actualization of potential, the person must know his or her actual worth. And actualization of potential you have already done in Maslow's need hierarchy theory in class 11, right? Now, according to this criterion, conforming behavior, that means if your behavior is in harmony, in sync, okay, in sync with the other counterparts of the people in the society or in the environment where the person, the individual, is living at the moment. So conforming behavior can be seen as abnormal if it is maladaptive. Okay, if it is not harmonizing with the other members of the society or anyone who is around the person who is developing some kind of maladaptive behavior. So if it interferes with optimal functioning and growth, there abnormality is seen according to the second approach. Now here I'm giving you an example. Most of you might relate it to yourself, but please, I'm warning you, please don't relate in each and everything which we will be doing in this chapter. Okay, it is possible that yes, some of the symptoms exist, since I already said that no person is normal, but that doesn't mean that everyone is abnormal or everyone is having some kind of psychological disorders. Okay, so here maladaptive behavior example is that A student in a class prefers to remain silent even when she or he has questions in his or her mind. Why a person will be silent if he or she have question in his mind? There might be many factors. Doesn't mean that he or she is having some kind of maladaptive behavior. But describing behavior as maladaptive implies that, of course, problem exists. It also suggests that vulnerability in the individual, inability to cope, or exceptional stress in the environment have led to problems in life. Now, if the student in the class prefers to remain silent even when she or he has questions in his or her mind, why? There have to be some kind of fear in his or her mind. Maybe there is issue with his or her confidence level. He or she is not confident enough about his or her question. That is why the student is not asking. There might be many other factors as well. Okay, but if some kind of maladaptive behavior exists, there is assumption that yes, there exists a problem. There have to be a problem. Okay. Next, let's talk about stigma. Stigma here, particularly we will talk about stigma related to psychological disorders. Okay. Now, psychological disorders very often, and even in and around our surrounding, people talk about psychological disorders very vaguely because they have very vague idea also about psychological disorders. And basically, they characterizes the psychological disorder to be some kind of superstition or ignorance and fear. They don't talk about psychological disorders. Instead, they will tell that the person is uh, possessed or something like that. And again, it is commonly believed that psychological disorder is something to be ashamed of. Many times we have heard people that they don't want to discuss about their psychological disorder. Why? Because they think or feel that if they talk about psychological disorders, they will be the talk of the town and then they feel ashamed about it. That is why they don't talk about it. And the stigma attached to mental illness basically means that people are hesitant to consult a doctor or psychologist because simply they're ashamed of their problems. Now, I don't understand what is there to be ashamed of, mental illness. That is same like that of the physical illness. Then why do you go to a doctor when you have some kind of physical illness? If you cannot talk about your mental illness and you are hesitant to go to a doctor or a psychologist because of the fact that you are ashamed of your problem, so that kind of stigma is attached to mental illness. Okay. But actually, psychological disorder, which indicates a failure in adaptation, should be viewed as any other illness. Like I said, any other physical illness, you go to a doctor. So similarly, for mental illness also, you should consult a doctor or a psychologist. Okay, so with this, I wind up this presentation. Please go through the presentations, understand the 4 Ds, then what are the 2 major approaches, and also this stigma. All right, thank you.